Hello, Coleen.
Hi there.
Okay, hold on while I add Todd.
Okay.
I was just playing a song. Okay, here we go. This is Todd?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Okay, hold on 1 minute. This is Tuesday, June 21st, Organic News on Awake Radio. I am Catherine April Waters with 2 T's. And I just want to introduce the 2 guests. It's going to be 2 hours with Coleen Rowley. She was appointed a special agent with the FBI and initially served in the Omaha, Nebraska and Jackson, Mississippi divisions. In 1984, she was assigned to the New York office for over 6 years, worked on Italian organized crime and Sicilian heroin drug investigations. During this time, Rowley also served 3 separate temporary duty assignments in the Paris, France Embassy and Montreal Consulate. And Todd Pierce, retired Major U.S. Army, served as Defense Counsel in the Office of Chief Defense Counsel, Office of Military Commissions from June 2008 to November 2012. He was on defense teams representing prisoners held at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Since retirement, he's been active with Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. The Samuel Adams Associates for Integrity in Intelligence, named for a CIA analyst. He serves on the board of advisors of ExposeFacts.org, which works to provide whistleblower protection. He writes on issues of constitutional rights, terrorism, drone warfare, and counterinsurgency, and his military service includes service as a senior PSYOP, NCO, and judge advocate with initial training as Marine Corps rifleman. And both of you have been on before, so both of you, thank you for joining me. And we're going to discuss the Orlando shooter and, FBI kind of setting up these kind of fake plots. So welcome, Todd and Coleen.
No, thanks.
Right there.
Okay, so let's get to this alternate article that was put out entitled "Before Omar Mateen Committed Mass Murder, the FBI Tried to Lure Him into a Terror Plot," by Max Blumenthal and Sarah Lazar of Alternate. And they do mention you in this article, Coleen. Did you want to address this article?
Yeah, basically, I told them that it's pretty much standard operating procedure now because there are so many potential terrorists or shooters in the country. You know, everybody says we don't want to be afraid. The problem is what they're doing is actually increasing the problem.
Right.
And so in some ways, we're getting a mass shooting in this country at schools, theaters, malls, all over the place, almost once a week. That is something we really should be a little bit alarmed about. It's pretty bad. But the problem is that the FBI made this promise that they could protect you and keep you safe as long as you allowed them greater authority. They did dilute the Attorney General guidelines that existed before 9/11, where you had to have higher thresholds of evidence to even begin investigating. And so those were all watered down little by little over the last few years, and there really are very little legal restraints on the FBI, except for they do have to have probable cause to make an arrest, and they do have to have probable cause to conduct a search or an electronic surveillance where they're listening in, like a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They do have to at least have that level. Otherwise, they've watered down the standards. And part of the promise was that if you allow us, American public, to do that, this is how we'll keep you safe. Now, that was actually a complete lie, because if any police agency, not just the FBI, had a way of foretelling and predicting who would commit a violent crime, this would have been a much better place a long time ago. And so it's really kind of stupid on the American public to believe these kind of myths, like a Minority Report, but just if they collect, trillions of pieces of data and they profile everyone in the computer system, if they create lists, lists with 1 million people on them, somehow that will let them know who are the terrorists and they'll be able to prevent the actual shooting or act of terrorism. That's the underlying real misinformation and problem.
Right.
The FBI strives to continue to make people believe that, because that's part and parcel of our foreign policy now. If they go start new wars and the American public believes that they are protected, they don't much care how many millions of foreigners become refugees or get killed, as long as they are protected. Now, if it's actually causing blowback where terrorism is increasing, and then secondarily the militarization that's required in our country through popular culture, violent video games, movies, all of these things to keep enthusiasm for war going, all of these things are part of the blowback too. And then this then has an effect on people, causing mass shootings, mostly by mentally deranged or troubled people. Even workplace violence has gone way up. And I think that it is all connected to this war mentality. Right. So what the FBI can do when they have 1.1 million names on the terrorist watch list, and there are overlapping lists, there are at least 7, possibly even 11 overlapping lists that they have put people on. By the way, this is not just 1 million people that are static. It's a continual revolving door of people being put on, and in some cases then taken off, and new people being put on. You remember famously Edward Kennedy was on the list. Even police chiefs have been on the list at times because their names were common. In some cases, the names on there are not well identified, and they could be just common things. So what can the FBI do with this? Now, this is the root of the problem that almost nobody's talking about. If there's only 10,000, 15,000 agents and maybe a few thousand more analysts, and there are literally millions of people that have been on a terrorist watch list, just do the math, and that comes to at least 50 to 100 to 200, 300 terrorist suspects per FBI agent. Okay? That's something I haven't heard I didn't say that. I think I may have said it to the alternate people, but that's something that, and people don't want to say it because they're afraid that'll make Americans even more afraid. Most of the good thing here is that most of the names on this massive watch list are completely innocent. That's actually one of the arguments that the people on gun rights, they said if you don't let the people on the terrorist watch list buy the guns, but the truth is, and they're right about this, most of the people on that list are completely innocent. They're nobodies. They're people like Edward Kennedy. And they are put on, taken off, put on, taken off. There's not much else the FBI can do. One of the things the FBI can do with no probable cause, almost no oversight, no one even knows the definitions they're using as to what would precipitate this launching an undercover. But it looks like they are increasingly launching undercover investigations of people that are put on the list. And what an undercover investigation amounts to is either putting an informant next to, trying to get cozy with that person, or an actual undercover police officer. Usually it starts through an informant and then it proceeds to an undercover police officer or an undercover FBI agent. And Trevor Aronson has written a book about this, trying to document how many of those cases that later were prosecuted have turned out to be people that were pushed to do something, create a bomb, get a gun and go to a site and say, I'm going to start shooting. And then usually that's when the takedown occurs. Then, of course, people say, well, look, he's at outside a synagogue and he was going to shoot people. and he already had a bomb, and he was, pressing the ignition on a bomb. So of course he's a terrorist. The problem with that is you don't know what created that person. And people who are vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable, mentally ill, people with drug and alcohol problems. I know one of the recent cases was a panhandler who had mental problems. So some of these people are quite easy to manipulate into doing these things. And actually, to be honest and fair about it, even good people, given the right savvy manipulator and the right pressures, even good people will do some terrible things. Exactly. That's the whole theme of the Good Germans that Hannah Arendt wrote about, the banality of evil. Yeah. All of these otherwise good people, but put into this situation, can actually commit genocides and everything else. And that's where I'll cease. Let Todd talk about it.
How many people marry the wrong people?
That's right. And you look at women going to regular criminal acts committed by women, which of course are on a far lesser scale than the acts committed by men. But many of the crimes that women commit are because some male has induced them to, do a crime or commit a crime. So that's exactly a good example.
Yeah,
too.
Anybody can be badly influenced. That's a no-brainer. Okay, Todd, thank you also for coming back. It's been a little bit longer for you, but what do you have to say about the Orlando shooter and the FBI creating fake plots?
Well, let me just add quickly to what Coleen said about the Fourth Amendment and probable cause.
Yep.
There's a case that was just came down from the Supreme Court, relaxing the constraints upon the police under the Fourth Amendment. I'm looking right now online. But anyway, there's a vigorous dissent by a couple of the justices, 3 of them, but by 5-3, it was ruled that given a mistake by the police, they can go ahead and not suppress the evidence that was gained from a illegal arrest.
Right.
But anyway, so we don't even have the Fourth Amendment. We know that it's been sliding away for years with the surveillance programs of the NSA and whatnot. So I just want to throw that in quick. But a couple of things in talking about Orlando. First of all, the headline in the Washington Post of a couple of days ago was Orlando gunman said he carried out attack to get Americans to stop bombing his country. And that's what a witness says. And that hasn't been paid much attention to. Immediately the Republicans and Trump and Hillary Clinton even, they shifted the discussion over to radical Islamic terrorism, which is, of course, the phrase that Netanyahu has used for years and has worked diligently to change the narrative for us to believe it's merely, or rather it's entirely radical Islam that's a problem here, and not at all his own actions by the Israeli government in maintaining what is really now a permanent occupation until they get what they want, which is to finally have the complete ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians entirely out of occupied territory. I think that's clear. So, to me, so you could say that this attack, because it's a gunman, worked for a for a large security company as well, a company that is like Blackwater or whatever it's called these days, where it worked with the government in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Now, this particular guy worked guarding a gate at a gated community, but nevertheless, he was part of the coalition, involved with these wars. So really, it was more of a green on blue attack, you could say. And a green on blue attack is what we use to describe when a Afghani soldier, gets upset with what he's seeing the U.S. Army military doing or NATO forces doing to his, population, and gets outraged and turns to violence and retaliation. So in a sense, you could say that this was a green on blue attack too. So more, like Coleen said, blowback from our wars. And that's the one thing we refuse to address, as well as the blowback, you could say, in the psychological change that's taking place in the American people. After 15 years of perpetual war, and a war that they say will never end because it is perpetual. And it's perpetual because of our own actions. We make it quite clear that we demand that the world, largely, particularly those who have some link to the Mideast, acquiesce to their own subjugation, either directly by us or by our partner Israel or by the vassal states we've created, such as Saudi Arabia, Jordan, or Egypt. So that's really what we're demanding. And so we refuse to see that perhaps, and this is not to defend them in the sense to justify what they're doing, but to acknowledge that Americans, all of the West, we've all turned to violence ourselves and we've been suppressed by military rule. You go to France today and they still celebrate the French resistance, the French terrorists who resisted the Nazis during World War II. We have a celebration coming up on the 4th of July where our own terrorists are going to be celebrated for defying the British military rule. So what happens under war, and this I will stop here, but you can look to all the theorists of war, there's a psychological change that takes place. And we once understood that when we studied Nazi Germany and militarist Japan during World War II. You know, the office of the OSS, whatever that stands for, Strategic Office of Strategic Security, whatever, I forget now, I'm sorry. But, you know, they did studies, social psychological studies of militarism. And we refuse to look at ourselves to realize that we become the militarists of the 21st century. And that causes, in a free society, what we're seeing, I think, this increased violence on many different levels, including those people who we deem terrorists who have some link and psychologically are motivated to feel like anger, so they attack us.
I just wanted to address your point that you said, this country doesn't ever want to look at themselves. They just want to always point fingers and never, think that it's anything that they're doing, as if like the laws of nature don't apply to, the powers that be or the 1% or whatever. And I just wanted to pose to both of you the question of, since the corporations have basically taken over the government and everything is about corporate profit. And, General Smedley D. Butler saying, war is a racket. What do you say to that? Just these ongoing wars are really just about corporate profit.
Coleen, you want
to? We had Smedley Butler and then we had Eisenhower. And they warned us, and it's painfully obvious, now to the point where we even have our elected officials with complete conflicts of interest because they're getting campaign donations directly from the war profiteers. The Pope, in his speech, in the recent speech, he said, I can't quote it exactly, but he said something like the blood-drenched war profits or something like that. This is terrible. These people, at one point, there was even a thought that war is so bad that we ought to have a tax on war profits. This was, decades ago. But, of course, that's a no-win. You can't get a tax on war profits when the people that are in power are the war profiteers and linked with them. So Eisenhower and Smedley Butler and many other people have been proven sadly correct. I don't know what the answer is now because these are the military-industrial complex corporations and others aligned with them are controlling the country. They're almost like a double government or a significant part of the double government that now, even if you had a good person who got elected as president, that person would not be able to do much because his or her hands would be tied by this double government. And you're absolutely right. Until this somehow ends, I don't know what the answer is because it's really bad to have, it's a profiteering from something that's bad and hurting other people, but yet no way to stop it. How can you stop profiteering? The people could stop it if they recognize that this was the problem. But most people do not recognize this in the United States. They're told that their enemies are Russians and Chinese and Mexicans, and they're told that their enemies are foreign people. They are not told that their real enemy are the war profiteers that are basically funneling the money themselves and stealing it from us.
Todd, did you want to add anything?
Yeah. So, a book I recommend is National Security and Double Government, which talks about the idea that there's a double government, really, and it's by Michael Glennon. I highly recommend it, and I think it helps make clear how we're really being governed today. But a couple of other points, and I'm working on an article on this, but this, Meg Whitman, who ran for governor of California, called Donald Trump the Friday before the Orlando attack a fascist. And I'm going to say that's, lifted the taboo on calling those of us Americans who are themselves genuine fascists. For so long, that word was just thrown about willy-nilly too often, by both left and right, just as an epithet, and really caused it to lose its meaning, so that when it finally comes along, nobody recognizes it. But in fact, it really has finally come along. The thing about Meg Whitman, she failed to say, was that Donald Trump is a fascist, and I would point to things he's been saying since Orlando as a primary exhibit. But I would also add that not only is he a fascist, but Meg Whitman is also in the Republican Party that she's been supporting for 50 years with all these wars. And not only the wars, but things like passing legislation, Section 1021 of the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, zealously argued by John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Joe Lieberman, both parties represented, declaring the need for the military to have the power to put American citizens into military detention. That's right out of Nazi Germany, right out of fascism. We need to recognize, I believe, and the other thing I would add to that is it is martial law. Anytime, to whatever degree, you have the military authorities over the civilian authorities, you have martial law. The opening line of a book I'd recommend with National Security and Double Government is by Ernst Fraenkel, who was a German Jewish lawyer who wrote this in 1939. The first line of the book, The Dual State, was, "Martial law is the constitution of National Socialist Germany." Well, we've now got martial law on the books, even though, to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been applied. But Chris Hedges found out what the Department of Justice felt about Section 1021 when they said, yeah, he could cross the line pretty easily and be put into military detention. So you could say that we, too, have martial law as a constitution of America today. But we know who brought it into being. All we have to do is look at the debates in the Senate. Lieberman, Kelly Ayotte later joined the debate, Graham and McCain. These are the mainstream, the so-called establishment Republicans that the entire media part of our world was looking for, relief from Donald Trump for the last year, looking for people like Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz to save us from Donald Trump. And they're the fascists as well. They're just competing rival fascists, you could say. And then I got to include Hillary Clinton in that. You look at what she's done, and I think fascism, as a number of commentators have said, and I'm writing about this a bit, is what fascism does. That's how you define it. And Hillary Clinton has acted like a fascist with her role in the Libyan war, what she tried to do with getting us into the Syrian war. Her admirer and assistant, Anna Marie Slaughter, basically described how Clinton thinks as a fascist, not in those words, but thinking irrationally, responding to emotion. That's irrationalism. That's fascist thought. And that's what we've fallen into. And since Orlando, everybody has been talking about who are we going to kill next? How many more Muslims can we kill? Rather than looking at ourselves and thinking, well, what policies perhaps do we have to consider here as we spiral downward into thinking we can dominate the world militarily?
And even though the facts and the evidence of the blowback is clear, I mean, I don't know, cause and effect. A fifth grader can figure that out, I mean, unless these people live so in the clouds that they really think that it doesn't apply to them. I have a short video of just under 5 minutes that I wanted to play for you, Todd, and Coleen, and the listeners of last March. It's a No Separate Justice vigil that they have the first Monday of every month here in New York. It's down at the MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Facility in Lower Manhattan, which is kind of like another sort of Rikers Island and Guantanamo that people don't know about. And this one, it's titled NYPD, CIA, and the FBI Create Fake Plots. And the speaker is speaking, reading a letter of a mother whose son was set up in a fake plot. It's just shy of 5 minutes long.
We're going to have a statement from Shahina Parveen Siraj. She is a leader at Desi's Rising Up and Moving, or DRUM. Through her work at DRUM, she has been able to work on issues of violence by law enforcement that have affected African American, Hispanic, and Muslim communities within the United States. Reading the statement she has written about her son, Mateen Siraj, and the hardship he and their family have faced after he was detained by American law enforcement will be one of the directors of DRUM, Todd.
Good evening. How are you? I'm going to read a statement by Shahina, so if it's in first person, you'll understand why. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shahina Parveen Siraj, and I am the mother of Omar Mateen Siraj. Here are a few words I would like to share with you all. Since 9/11, the NYPD, the FBI, and the CIA have conducted secret operations and spread paid informant and undercover officers who target, manipulate, and entrap innocent young Muslim men into fake plots manufactured by the police themselves. Oftentimes, they target vulnerable men who are young, immature, mentally or financially unstable. Mateen, my only son, who cared about playing in the street and who had an IQ of 78, is one among the hundreds of these fake cases. The NYPD, along with an undercover and a paid informant who was paid $100,000, manufactured this case. With lies and manipulation, they entrapped my son. The paid agent first befriended my son and then gained his trust over a period of several months. After gaining the trust, he slowly began to poison his mind by showing him torturous pictures of Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo, Palestine, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sabra, and Shatila. And then he started pushing my son to take action. Many times my son told the informant that he did not want to do anything, but the informant took advantage of my son's lack of maturity to threaten him. Eventually, my son tired of him and cut off all communications with the informants. And 4 days later, right before the Republican National Convention, he was arrested in a high-profile arrest. At the time of my son's arrest, everybody in the community was surprised. If average people couldn't figure this informant out, how could then my simple and immature son understand his manipulation? As of last week, we've heard of another case here in New York City. Law enforcement had investigated and interviewed 3 young men many months before, and then decided to send an informant after these young men. These men, in their investigations, they learned had no money and had no ability to do anything on their own, and only were engaged in speaking reckless words. Why did the informant encourage them to move their crazy ideas into action, including providing them money? Why was there no effort to intervene? Why was there no effort to have community leaders or counselors talk to them? Are law enforcement agencies working to help keep us safe, or are they creating the danger so that they can solve it for themselves? Is the fact that law enforcement can get millions in funding because of these instances an incentive to manufacture terrorism cases? All of these things are happening to Muslim families since 9/11, but we know America has a history of targeting many communities in this way. Indigenous communities, African American communities, Latinos, immigrants, workers, and poor people. They've all been targeted, but in different ways. These injustices still continue, and innocent people are targeted based on who they are and what they believe. People are put into prisons. People are killed. And we see this happening from Ferguson to New York. And they do not even hide it anymore. Who is safe? What is safety? And what is justice? Those who are supposed to keep us safe are the ones that are targeting and abusing us. In every community, we see families having their children snatched away from them. Our communities are different, our problems are different, but our pain is one. At this point, we need unity. We need to stand together, and we need to fight together. The system does not work. It is because the system is not meant to work for us. We have to fight to change the system. We need a new world where every human has justice and peace. We will not be afraid, we will not be silent, and we will continue to fight. Thank you.
Yes, so that was last March in down by the MCC. Does either one of you want to comment?
I can a little bit.
Okay.
I mentioned there's a book by Trevor Aronson
Right.
That has documented, and there's, I think, another one called the Salam Project that also is documented a number of these cases. Now, here's the problem. If you are able to push someone to commit a crime that person would not have otherwise committed if they had not been pushed, pressured, coerced, subtly influenced, there will be no way to know if that person would have committed the crime or not. That's the problem here. So the FBI can have the leeway of saying, well, look, this person was on the verge of committing a crime. And there will be no way of knowing. If you go back to the case of Mateen, now people are criticizing the FBI because they got 2 tips that he was claiming to coworkers that he was connected to the Boston bombers. In one case, he threatened to hurt a coworker, etc. And they're saying, oh, look, there was plenty of evidence. You should have done something more than you did. You should not have let him kill 49 people. Now, we don't know for sure exactly. We will never know, by the way. It's impossible to know. But when they set him up for the sting, when the FBI, which is, again, it's standard operating procedure to do 2 things when you're interviewing somebody and a tip has come in. When a tip like this has come in, you're going to end up doing an interview. In the course of that interview, you're going to try to see if you can get that person that you're interviewing to become an informant, to cooperate. That's, in many cases, one of the big inducements for these interviews, is they're trying to recruit people then to spy on others. So that's always going to be a part of the interview. The other thing is, in this case, apparently a sheriff said that they put an informant next to Mateen to see if he would bite on some suggestion that he committed a terrorist act, and he did not bite. Okay, and so in alternate, there is a possibility. The alternate article asked me. And there is a possibility, although we don't know, that informant who suggested to Mateen that he should commit an act as part of a fake sting, there's a couple of things here. It could have planted the idea in Mateen's head, oh, look, other people are talking about this, so maybe that's something I should do or I should think about. It could have actually helped plant the idea. The other thing it could have done is because Mateen was apparently, I don't think he was mentally deficient. I think he wasn't vulnerable that way. There many of these people don't have a high IQ, and he looks like he was smart enough. And he worked in a security company like Blackwater, GS4, where he would have been exposed in training and in talk to the fact that this is happening, that Muslims are being, approached and in some cases set up. And so he could have recognized that guy was trying to get him, to commit an act. And he could have become mad about it. That could have actually been one of the motivations that he now, instead of being the good security worker who wanted to become a police officer, wanted to become NYPD, had actually previously disparaged all kinds of groups of people, something you kind of would expect from somebody working security, and all of a sudden he flipped over the other way. Well, maybe one of the reasons for that was because the sting itself backfired, and he became mad, recognizing that this was the case. Now, I will, just insist that no one knows. I mean, these are all possibilities. These are, however, the things that you're not hearing on the nightly news. And the reasons you're not hearing the actual reality, these types of things on the nightly news, Scott Pelley doesn't come out with them, is because he's going by the government transcripts and the government officials who are allowed to leak to him to tell him things that will bolster the so-called war on terrorism and bolster their budgets, bolster the war profiteering. And so we're getting a very slanted and skewed version. And this is frankly why people, when you said, why don't people understand the blowback? Because factually, it's very clear. I just want to add to Todd's, what Todd said. A woman who was already shot said that she overheard him on the phone, Mateen, saying, I'm shooting people because they're bombing my country. Now, that was paraphrased by a victim who was obviously traumatized. The actual transcript now that the FBI attempted to censor, originally they attempted to censor the transcript of the calls between the shooter Mateen and hostage negotiator FBI. But in the calls themselves, it said, I'm shooting people because they're bombing Iraq and Syria. Okay, so that's even more clear. It's not my country of Afghanistan. It's clearly a possible motivation that he was mad about the foreign wars and bombing. So again, classic blowback. I will just stress one more thing. Even that is not known, that this blowback was the main motivation for him, because Mateen is if he had seems to have had an okay IQ. He's not mentally deficient, but he was troubled emotionally, all kinds of mental issues. He beat his wife. He was an abuser. He talked about hating gays. He talked about, wanting to align with terrorists. I mean, he was all over. By the way, when he said he wanted to align with terrorists, he even picked different groups that are actually fighting with each other. So he obviously did not spend much time on understanding the phenomenon. And he was all over the map, which really indicates he was a troubled individual, very much like some of these other mass shooters, the Navy Yard, the guy who shot Giffords in the parking lot, the guy who attacked the Sikh temple, even someone like Dylan Roof who attacked the black church as part of a hate crime. Who else? The Sandy Hook shooter. These are people that have serious emotional problems. And I think the best you can say with Mateen is he was a mixed bag. He had mixed motivations. They're trying to fit a square, a peg, a round peg into a square in order to make this consistent with what they tell you about the war on terrorism. They never mention mass shootings having anything to do with the war on terrorism. And in fact, Colonel Hassan, who shot 13 people at Fort Hood, and he was in touch with al-Awlaki, who was, in Yemen, and our government said was one of the top terrorists. He was in touch with him. He was emailing him. And yet, our government, after that shooting of killing 13 and wounding another 13 or so, they said Hassan's was workplace violence because they didn't want the American public to see the blowback there. I'm just trying to explain that they're trying desperately to keep the war on terrorism going, right. And so they have to characterize these shootings in all different ways, try to neatly categorize them as a mass shooting, or a hate crime, or workplace violence, or in this case, trying to make it into Islamic extremism terrorism. And it's really a mix of all of them.
I mean, I just wanted to say, sooner or later, I feel like, I hope the American people start to, scratch their head and say, hey, wait a minute, all of this can't be, just some hate crime or this, that, and the other thing. It has to just be, and especially when you hear Omar Mateen say, stop attacking Syria, and this is why, he says that this is why he's doing it as not some kind of form of, blowback. There's got to be consequences. I think you even posted, Coleen, the mayor of Hawaii?
No, it was Tulsi Gabbard. She is one of the really good Democratic representatives, congresswoman from Hawaii. And she was actually one of the people introducing Bernie Sanders on the campaign trail. And her last speech is unbelievable. If you've not heard it, she is clearly talking about this blowback is due to the U.S. military interventions in Syria, in Libya, and in Iraq. And, she's saying, how can we not understand that what we did in Iraq led to all of the problems in the Mideast? We destabilized the country. We created ISIS. All of those war refugees, destabilized the neighboring countries. So anyway, she's saying this very clearly. The really disappointing thing about this talk, it was at a progressive place called the People's Forum in Chicago, and the applause for her really saying the reality that this is so painfully counterproductive and has caused all of our problems. There was very little applause, and this is what's gone on with the progressives. The War Party, of course, has always been both parties, both Democrats and Republicans. But with Hillary Clinton's rise on the Democratic side, and now you have her former State Department Foreign Service officers all shilling for war. 51 of them signed on. We got to bomb Syria. So what's happened is there's been a shift. I know Todd talked about the Republican Party, which originally, of course, you go back to the Project for the New American Century, and they were in bed mostly with George Bush and the Republican Party. They got all their people, Wolfowitz and Scooter Libby, they got them all into Bush's administration, and then they took off. However, there's been a big transition in the last couple of years, and the War Party now has shifted to the Democrats. I'm just going to, take issue just a little bit with what Todd said a little bit about Trump. Trump now, one of the reasons why the neocon war hawks have deserted the Republican Party, and all of them now, with the one exception of William Kristol, and William Kristol keeps quiet, but, so he's trying to play coy, I think, so the Republicans will still, he won't burn his bridges with the Republicans. But all the rest of them, Kagan's, the latest one was Richard Armitage. I mean, essentially, they have all said, we're backing Hillary Clinton. What they don't say exactly is because she's going to take us to even more and bigger and better wars. And that's why all of these war hawks now have shifted, and they frankly hate Trump. And they hate Trump for one reason. He's talked about non-intervention. He blamed Jeb Bush for his brother's war on Iraq. He said he would talk to Putin, and he would talk, to the Syrian president. He said that these wars don't make any sense. So he's essentially kind of made the points that Tulsi Gabbard has made. And to be honest, the Republican establishment and the neocon war hawk, which is very, very powerful now, hates that, and they've all shifted over to Hillary. Now, when you lament how uninformed the American public is, and this is where I'm so frankly depressed about seeing, even on social media and Facebook, all of these Hillary supporters who really have no understanding or clue of what they support. Again, they just know I'm a loyal Democrat and I'll always be a Democrat, and the Democrats are always going to be better than the Republicans, etc. And yet now, because of this shift, it is actually Hillary who is posing the greatest. And I will just say one more thing. Hillary has a track record. So if you are an intelligence analyst and you're looking to try to guess at what people will do, and to be honest, it's nothing more than an educated guess, at the very least, Trump does not have a track record. So he's a big question mark. No one knows exactly what he would actually do. He may be terrible. He may do some terrible things. He may do some of the things his mouth, the way he talks, really, with his both feet in his mouth, he may well do those things. But you look at Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is responsible now for millions of deaths, right, just like Madeleine Albright, who was her mentor. She's already responsible. So to be honest, this is the problem that we have right now. Of course, Bernie Sanders, was certainly better than either of them. But it looks like he now does not have any chance at all. And, on a political level, it is very difficult to get people to be organized and do something without a leader. And Hillary Clinton, she's taken over. The polls show that she's going to win.
I'm just going to say one thing really quickly, that Hillary is being a bad influence on the people, like these informants are being on these people that they're trying to set up. Okay, so now we're going to Todd. The floor is yours, Todd. Thank you for standing by.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with anything Coleen just said about Hillary Clinton. What has changed a bit here, which has become more evident, I believe, with Trump, is like today online was a headline from a Jewish journal, from AIPAC to Trump, Michael Glassner's journey. How does one go from serving as AIPAC's Southwest Regional Political Director a year ago to running Donald Trump's national political operation today? Well, that's Glassner, who's now basically in charge of Trump's campaign. If you listen to Trump's rhetoric the last week and a half, actually going back more, but especially the last week and a half, he's plagiarizing, from Benjamin Netanyahu. And so, like I say, what we're seeing is, and this is not unprecedented, we're seeing rival fascists, you could say, arguing over how this is to be done. This is why my opinion, Trump, now he's hooked up with General Michael Flynn, is it, who was the DIA chief, but he in turn has a book coming out with Michael Ledeen. And Michael Ledeen is the devil incarnate, you could say, at least politically, as far as what he's done. He represents American fascism, if there is such a thing, which I say there is. So now we got Donald Trump, who has a second-order relationship with Michael Ledeen. And they're Trump is spouting off the book from Flynn Ledeen's book. So, again, that's what causes me concern. And, they have their focus on Iran first, and, Assad, because he's talking now about taking down Assad. And he had a recent speech, Trump did, about Russia, too, being something of a threat. So, again, I think he's shifting. And I think with Trump, to my opinion, very negative opinion of him, everything has been calculated. And he knew to sort of be against the war would appeal to the Ron Paul types, first of all, and maybe some others. But now that he's getting closer to it, he's bringing in the people who's always had some association with, like Michael Glassner. So when you have AIPAC running his campaign, you got to be suspicious. The other thing, let me add here, and I'm writing about this, Netanyahu is, again, this taboo of calling people fascists has been lifted. Both in the United States, I would say now, with Trump having started it, but not including as many people as he should, but also Netanyahu in Israel, where Israeli non-right-wingers are saying now, with we're seeing the facts on the ground, that Netanyahu is a fascist. We've got Avigdor Lieberman now brought into Netanyahu's government, and a number of other radical right-wingers. And, there's been a few books written in the last few years by both Israeli and American Jewish historians talking about the fascist roots of Menachem Begin, and which would include Netanyahu's father, Benzion Netanyahu, both of whom came out of that gutter of interwar fascism coming out of Poland, and represented that far right wing of Zionism. And, it's so well known that Einstein and Hannah Arendt, wrote an open letter published in the New York Times in 1950 when Begin came to the U.S. telling their fellow Jewish Americans that this guy is a fascist. Like I say, Netanyahu's father was right with him on that. And Netanyahu's father was interviewed just a few years ago, shortly before he died, declaring he is still held to those beliefs, and that his son agreed with him. Again, you look at the facts, you look at what's been said and done by Netanyahu, and in the guise of fighting terrorism, he's always advocated adopting fascist legal measures. And when 9/11 came along, we turned to the supposed experts on counterterrorism, which was really merely the experts on maintaining a hostile, harsh military occupation on a captive people in the form of, what was done in Europe in the 1940s. And that's what we adopted as counterterrorism. And so it's no surprise that we're doing to the American people now the same things that the Israeli Defense Force does to the occupied Palestinians. And that gets into adopting their counterinsurgency tactics, training our police for those counterinsurgency tactics, so they see our own population as potential insurgents. And that goes to the point of view that's brought into something like that. It's a military point of view, and it goes to the whole idea that if there's so much as a 1% chance, Cheney's 1% doctrine, that somebody could pose a threat to the nation, they have to be prevented from that. When World War II broke out, we already had plans in place going back at least 10 to 15 years on what we were going to do with the Japanese Americans, having already anticipated a war with Japan. And we did. We declared martial law immediately in Hawaii, and in the West Coast, we didn't declare martial law. We merely issued an order that the Japanese Americans would be removed from the West Coast by the military. In effect, martial law. And that's and the reasoning you read, there's some good books written about this. We need to look at that experience to understand what's going on today. But the military was saying, military leaders behind this were saying things like, well, there's a potential that they could be disloyal. If there's potentially disloyalty, then, potentially they could be in subversion or sabotage. So therefore, we got to put them in preventive detention, concentration camps, as we called them then. So that's what we did then, and now we have people talking about the same thing right now. So we need to consider that, again, we're not only calling people fascists, but we really have adopted a fascist mindset. And much of that comes from the intellectual giant of fascism today, Benjamin Netanyahu. If you read his books, you can see clearly, he's spouting off these fascist ideological beliefs, going back to the entire history of his political party that he now heads.
It sounds like they're participating in global stop and frisk.
Exactly. No, exactly. We are doing to the world, and this can go back, you could say, to 1992 with Cheney and Wolfowitz's release or leaked Wolfowitz Doctrine, the 1992 Draft Defense Planning Guidance, where it was declared that we would not tolerate any regional competitor even if they have legitimate grievances. In other words, and then with the military commission, that was a final stage in basically imposing global martial law. Right now we're saying that somebody on the other side of the world says something critical of the United States, we can deem that to be material support for terrorism and put them into military detention. We haven't gone quite that far with Americans yet, to the best of my knowledge, but it's on the books where it can be.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I found the video, Coleen, of the congresswoman from Hawaii. And then I guess what I'll do is I'll play the video after the top of the hour. And at 7, I was going to invite people, if there's anybody out there that wanted to call in or have a question. The number would be 917-947-9036. Anybody have questions, comments on this subject of, perpetual, endless war and, creating blowback? Okay, so go ahead, Coleen.
When Todd mentioned that there are calls, and he said, well, we haven't gotten that far. I think just today or yesterday, a Republican congressman from Oklahoma, last name Onby, called for a quote-unquote final solution for the Muslims here in the United States. And he was taking an article that was already written by some, obviously, right-wing extremist, and he actually used the term final solution, which is what the Nazis called the genocide of the Jews. And so he actually called for this in reposting this article and saying, we have to have a final solution for the Muslims. It's not a true religion, and, basically they're all terrorists. So this is already at this stage. It's really, really, again, there's very little, because our mainstream media, until the mainstream media understands that the blowback is going to affect themselves and not just, make them wealthy on for more profits. I think that's the thing. If they realize that they will be affected, then maybe they would actually get with trying to educate people. When you're talking about fascism, the hallmark of fascism is launching wars of aggression, which are the supreme crime. And this is where the 51 State Department people, and of course, what war are we going to start now? We had a shooting in Orlando, could have been a hate crime, could have been workplace violence, all kinds of things, but we're going to, have to go to war on another country. So these wars of aggression, and we're at the point now of just debating. Hillary will do it for sure. She's going to bomb Syria. She's already said she would create a no-fly zone, which is code for, as in Libya, for bombing the country. So they're setting the stage. These 51 State Department people are greasing the skids for what comes next, by all accounts. And again, if people don't understand that it's going to hurt themselves and not just kill millions of people in the Mideast, if they understand that this is going to hurt themselves, that's the key thing. And it's very difficult because people think that the wars are making them safe. They think the FBI's, abusing the old law of the Fourth Amendment and the NSA's collection of data are keeping them safe. The secrecy is keeping them safe. It's exactly the opposite. It's why we are experiencing this level of violence in the United States.
I just wanted to, make the point, you mentioned the media and how, they get this money, the war profits, and how it's going to hurt them eventually. Because I noticed this, with so many people and how they're willing to kind of sacrifice, their moral health and their moral integrity for this, basically man-made, wealth, which is what really money kind of is. I mean, I've done shows on exactly what money is, where does it come from. To me, that's like one of the most key things that I really like to expose to people. I mean, it doesn't come from nature. It's created and perpetuated out of debt. And I also refer to Anthony Lowenstein and his book called Disaster Capitalism. I talk a lot about the for-profit prisons that are popping up all over. I mean, what do you call that? I mean, it's people aren't, any way you can make money. I mean, it's like, who cares about human life? Who cares about the environment? I mean, I can kind of go on, but okay, it's just about the top of the hour. I'm just going to play like a little bit of bumper music, and then I'll come back and play the video of the Congresswoman from Hawaii. So please stay tuned.
Welcome to Organic News with Kat Waters, revealing the truths behind the conspiracy. Every Tuesday from 6 to 8.
When it turns to get no better than this world. When it turns to get no better than this. When it turns to get no better than this world. When the times don't get no better than this. Used to reminisce when I was a kid. Mama had to work all day, and daddy ran away another day for a hard-working black family. I stayed praying that money would come our way. I wouldn't think that all her pain go away, and everything would be A-okay. Another day for a hard-working black family.
But times don't get no better than this. Was a kid on the block with the dawn, the minute everything changed, got strange to rearrange. But who's to blame? It's just the ways of the game.
comes that child. I say we gon' make it do this one for you, dear mama.
Sometimes don't get no better than this. Sometimes you get the switch, sometimes you get the miss. But that's just the way it goes. For the Brooklyn kid that everybody knows. But he used to be thick as the 5'3". The high school dropout got the GED. Things back at home wasn't nothing so right. So I have to turn style and go back.
Okay, so again, if anybody has a burning desire to call in and ask a question to Todd E. Pierce or Coleen Rowley, call 917-947-9036. And now I'm going to play the video Hawaiian Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Who worked so hard to make today possible, and who are working even harder to lay out the path for how we can make sure we continue progress on all of these important issues. There's so much at stake as we look at the next 5 months before us, but also how we engage beyond that. We've got to make sure that our voices are heard, whether it's on environmental protection, healthcare, education, criminal justice reform, Social Security, jobs, veterans, campaign finance reform, and so much more. There's one issue that impacts all the rest. If we continue to spend trillions of dollars on these costly interventionist regime change wars, overthrowing dictators in countries that we don't like, the fact is we will not be able to afford to make any real progress on the change that we need right here at home. Now, the very reason why we're gathered here as progressives is because we care about the well-being of others. We care about our future. We're soft-hearted people who have aloha, respect, and compassion for others, and we never want to be in a position to see anyone suffering. As a result, for some, it may be easy to believe that maybe we should support a regime change war if we believe that war will relieve human suffering. Proponents of the interventionist wars in Libya and in Iraq argue that these actions were justified because of humanitarian concerns. It was pointed out over and over again that these countries were in the grips of these evil dictators who had to be removed. This is precisely the same argument that is being used today to justify our war to overthrow the Syrian government of Assad. Hoping to garner the support of the American people, proponents of these regime change wars routinely cite humanitarian concerns to justify this military intervention in foreign countries. But here's the reality. As a direct result of our intervention in Iraq, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, human suffering there is increased dramatically. Terrorist organizations such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda took advantage of the Maliki Shia-led government that persecuted and oppressed the Sunni people. ISIS therefore gained a stronghold in Iraq, kidnapping, terrorizing, raping, and killing thousands and thousands of innocent people. In Libya, when the U.S. led the bombing campaign to overthrow Gaddafi, which began with a no-fly zone, the result was incredible loss of life, total chaos, with Libya resulting in a failed state and a haven now for ISIS and other terrorist organizations. There is no denying that the interventionist wars in Iraq and Libya that were propagated as necessary to relieve human suffering have in fact increased human suffering in those countries many times over. There's an old saying that's very relevant to what's facing us here today, that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions. Unfortunately, even after seeing how disastrous these wars in Iraq and Libya were, many people who championed those wars are now advocating for the very same thing all over again. Another regime change war for humanitarian reasons, this time in Syria, to overthrow a dictator that we don't like. There's not one but two wars that are being waged in Syria. First is a war to defeat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other jihadist groups. This is a war against terrorists who've declared war on America, and it's a war that we must win. The second is the counterproductive war to overthrow the government of Assad, an illegal war that Congress has not authorized and which must end. This war to overthrow the Syrian government has strengthened rather than weakened our enemies like ISIS. Working with countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, we are fueling a brutal civil war that's caused the deaths of over 400,000 Syrians and millions more refugees fleeing their homes. The fact is, if this war is successful and the Assad government is overthrown, the strongest force that exists in Syria that will take over in Syria is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. This will result in a far worse humanitarian disaster, refugee crisis, and a genocide against religious minorities, secularists, atheists, LGBT, and anyone who does not prescribe to this specific extreme ideology. But to speak of the fact that this will present an even greater security threat to the region and to the world. Just the other day, we heard news of 51 State Department diplomats calling on President Obama to bomb the Syrian government. Unfortunately, this is not surprising. These kinds of bombings and escalation are what will occur if Secretary Clinton does what she says she will do as president and establish a so-called no-fly zone in Syria, an action that would cost billions of dollars, tens if not hundreds of thousands of ground troops, as well as a massive U.S. air presence. This action will escalate this war to overthrow the Syrian government, causing more death, more destruction, more chaos, more refugees, all the while strengthening groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The very first action that must be taken when implementing a no-fly zone in Syria would be to bomb Russian and Syrian anti-aircraft defense systems. This would lead our country into a direct confrontation with the world's other nuclear power, Russia. Too many people have not learned from the past. They've learned nothing from Iraq and that overthrow of Saddam Hussein. They've learned nothing from overthrowing Gaddafi in Libya and the chaos that has ensued as a result, where ISIS has now been declared as having their strongest and most dangerous foothold. The only way to prevent this escalation, the only way to prevent this disaster from increasing is for the American people, us, to come out strongly now before another administration comes into power and say that this war to overthrow the Syrian government must end now.
Yeah, it goes on for like another 4 minutes, so I guess I will kind of pause it there. Okay, so who would like to comment to what the Congresswoman said, which is completely true?
Yeah, I just want to mention her background. Tulsi Gabbard was a military officer. I think she served in Iraq. So she has that background where she really does understand the lies and deceptions that have gone into these wars. And she realizes that we aren't really, we're telling the public we're fighting ISIS in Syria, and in Iraq, we're trying to help the Iraqis. But in essence, we are also supporting the Al-Qaeda aligned terrorist groups through Saudi Arabia and through Turkey. There's so much deception here because we want to topple and destabilize these governments. We don't, and we used, just as we did in Charlie Wilson's war, using the fundamentalist mujahideen in Afghanistan, to fight the Russians. We used them as proxies. We're doing the same thing in Syria. And in fact, we created ISIS by the invasion of Iraq. No one will tell you these things. And so they say, the American public thinks, oh, we've got to fight the terrorists. There's actually right now what is called a cat fight going on between the Department of Defense and the CIA, because the CIA has covertly aligned itself with ISIS-like, maybe not directly with ISIS, but indirectly aligned with ISIS, because the weapons flowed right to ISIS. They've aligned themselves with the terrorist groups in order to topple Assad, just as they did the same thing in Libya in order to topple Gaddafi. The Department of Defense, there are some at least in the Department of Defense, and I'll say Michael Flynn, I think, who was the head of the Department of Intelligence in DOD, was in this camp. They understand that this is pretty darn serious now when you get a group like ISIS. It gets to be very serious, and we shouldn't be playing around trying to say we're fighting them, and in fact, we're actually trying to use those groups to our benefit to topple the government. Our veteran intelligence professionals is working right now on a memo that makes some of these points along the lines of Tulsi Gabbard, because these 51 foreign service officers really this is important, because as I said, they're trying to grease the skids for yet another war of aggression on the Syrian government. But as Tulsi Gabbard said, even more serious, because now it looks like this will involve taking or confronting a risk of a military confrontation with a nuclear-armed Russia. You can't get more serious than this. You're talking seconds before the doomsday clock if we start a war with Russia. And so this is extremely serious. We sit here and lament that we can't inform the American public about how bad this is. Tulsi Gabbard says it very clearly and has, a handful of progressives even clapping for her. I don't know. It's a sad situation that we have right now that we're looking at. And Hillary knows this. She knows people don't understand, and she's pushing forward.
Todd?
Exactly. You got to keep in mind that Hillary was the Secretary of State supervising Victoria Nuland and allowing Nuland to conduct what was really a coup in Ukraine in order to take it out of under any influence by Russia for the purpose of putting it into a hostile position against Russia so that we could then justify what we're doing. Let me quickly, while I'm talking, I'll point out that the only thing she didn't point out, and I agree with her entirely, is that, we've got a longer term strategy here, and you look at things in a row. And you can look at national security strategy documents of the United States, you can look at various declarations, other things. And again, you can look at the Ukrainian action, what we're doing, and how we're trying to ramp up a war against Russia. And, you look at strategy, good or bad strategy, but in this case, bad strategy for success, you could say, but the bad motive is that we really are trying to not allow Russia to have any influence as a regional power, even if they have legitimate grievances. That's what the Cheney-Wolfowitz doctrine says. And we've actually been doing that since 1992, but we've been following the same strategy that Oded Yinon, who was an Israeli foreign service officer in 1982, wrote, suggesting that what Israel should do is just fragment all the Arab countries around it, break them up into little pieces, and then Israel could have their way with them. That was the same thing that Richard Pearl and PNAC people told Netanyahu when he took office as prime minister for his first term. He said the same. He gave him the Oded Yinon plan. And you look at what our foreign policy has been, beginning with the Cheney doctrine, and there are people who say that the Clintons used that. That's been our Department of Defense policy ever since, have been using that ever since. And you look at this isn't to be a conspiracy theorist, the conspiracy is hidden. This is right out in the open. The war with Kosovo, what did we do? What was that really about? We wanted to neutralize, terminate Russia's one remaining ally in Europe, which was, the leader of Yugoslavia. Help me with his name. I'm not a communist. Milosevic. In fact, I was an anti-communist. Remain an anti-communist. Remain an anti-totalitarian, which is why I'm so opposed to what the United States is doing today. So we got rid of Milosevic, and now we have basically that territory under our occupation or under our control, hegemony. Here's a quote I was looking for a minute ago of Hannah Arendt. Sorry for dragging here, but in The Origins of Totalitarian, what she wrote was, practically speaking, a totalitarian ruler proceeds like a man who persistently insults another man until everybody knows that the latter is his enemy, so that he can, with some plausibility, go and kill him in self-defense. And if you think about it, that's been our foreign policy since 1992, especially beginning with 9/11. We've done it through the 7 countries that the General Wesley Clark, who's not exactly the greatest guy either in some issues, but pointed out, it's on YouTube, that we had a plan from the very beginning of 9/11 to take down 7 countries in the Mideast, including Syria. And that plan hasn't gone as fast as the neocons thought it would, but it's been proceeding apace, and it's nearing completion, and thanks large part to Hillary Clinton. So, and we're doing the same thing with Russia today. We're encircling it. We just sent parts of one of our fleets into the Black Sea, right up against Russia's border. We've been the aggressor against Russia, but we hide it so that we can, with some plausibility, as Arendt says, go and kill them in self-defense. Hopefully the world will, in our mind, the world will believe it. Well, if not the world, at least the American people will continue letting them, military-industrial complex, have their way with us.
And I was going to say, since you brought up 9/11, Todd, and they're I don't know if they're ever going to release those 28 pages, and being that they do use 9/11 as an excuse to have these ridiculously endless, I just call them for-profit wars. I'm completely convinced that 9/11 was an inside job. To what degree, that I don't know. But, if they could be doing all these endless wars, of course they could do 9/11. And it was also William Binney who said, in the last time that I interviewed him, that, the people, they just don't want to believe that their government would sell them out.
But I agree 100% with Bill Binney in that statement. I don't go to that this is an inside attack. Show me the evidence. I'm very careful not to, to look at conspiracies like that or believe there are, because I don't think we need to, number one. Why would some disaffected people who've been, I've represented Al-Qaeda prisoners, and I've read a lot of their material, and they make no secret that, hey, there's 3 reasons why why they felt they had a right to attack the United States. This was before 9/11. But there are 3 reasons. One was the United States left troops in Saudi Arabia after, the Gulf War. And most people think, well, it offends their religious sensibilities. No, they were left there to prop up the Saudi government as our proxy, as our as our collaborator in the Mideast to help maintain our control of it. The other part of their grievances was what Madeleine Albright said was worth it, the killing of 500,000 Iraqi children under our sanctions policy. That's, again, Albright thought was worth it. But why would somebody live in the Mideast think that was worth it? 500,000 Americans, wouldn't that anger either of you two or anybody listening to this? Of course it would. We went to war, back in 1776 for far less. And then the third one is, of course, the unending military occupation of Palestine. And it makes sense if you understand anything about human nature or the social psychologists who write. It's not to say that everybody thinks this way, but as we've already discussed, everybody's mind has these variables. And when you get the right combination of variables and then attach it to a legitimate political grievance, you're going to get anger and hatred, and that's where wars come from, as Clausewitz would write. And in ordinary nation states, you go in the Marines, and they're going to generate anger and hatred and help you overcome the natural human aversion to killing other people. There is a natural human aversion. That includes with people in the Mideast, Arabs, Muslims. But when you do enough things, some people with that right combination or wrong combination of other social, psychological attributes can be angered so much that they feel the only thing left, and this is Hannah Arendt, this is right out of traditional classical social psychology, will take up arms.
Absolutely.
We did it after Pearl Harbor. We did it after 9/11. We've waged wars in the Mideast, and again, Clausewitz's relying on him. Wars are never an isolated act. Ever since we split up the Mideast following World War I with the Sykes-Picot Treaty, we've been ruling it directly and indirectly, and that was the first thing that ISIS did when they took over territory between Iraq and Syria, was made a very big display of erasing the border between Iraq and Syria. But since World War I, we've obviously added far more grievances that they might have. Let me recommend one more book, and then I'll be quiet. Andrew Vasevich recently come out with America's War for the Greater Middle East. And, it's there. It's all these things that we've been doing in the Mideast, killing Mideastern people, Arabs, and feeling that we had a right to do so because we're the exceptional people, or to support the Israelis in their routine mowing of the lawn, as they call it, when they go in and massacre Gazans on the basis that they're the chosen people and have a right, God-given right, to maintain this horrible military occupation. Basically, they're ghettos, the Gaza ghetto, the West Bank ghetto, and nobody catches the irony that there was a Warsaw ghetto, which was exactly the same thing.
If it's possible, I'd like to add a couple of things. A lot of these foreign policies and blowback and all of the different things are discussed in a pretty wise fashion on Consortium News. And it's if you read that, you'll see retired CIA analysts like Paul Pillar and Ray McGovern, and actually now there's actually many more. Our group, our veteran intelligence professionals, that's where we post our memos. And so, for instance, this one about the 51 foreign service officers advocating for more war, that probably will be there. So I would highly recommend, if people want to try to educate their neighbors about these issues and these problems, to go to that site and, let people read. Once you're retired, you have a little more independence to speak out. I mean, until they take our pensions away, they threaten to do that even, so I don't know. But right now, there are really retired military, retired intelligence people writing for Consortium News who know the truth. And the other thing I wanted to recommend was David Swanson wrote this book, War is a Lie, about the various deceptions that have always been involved in starting wars, in waging war, and in even in history, trying to make the nobility of war afterwards as some great thing. And so these lies are what this is why you have at a football game, thousands of people standing up and with tears in their eyes, believing that war is such a great thing and that our warriors are heroes. Unfortunately, some of the mass shooters also believe that they are heroes. They think they're going to get their 10 minutes of fame by picking up a gun and shooting, just for the very same reasons, because you're ennobling these wars are the most senseless violence that exists. But David Swanson talks about maybe, I'm just going to list three. There are kind of like three main lies. They fall into these categories. And the one that Todd just talked about, when he quoted Hannah Arendt about provocation, the German foreign minister just recently, yesterday or today, called out NATO. This is very good. We have a high-ranking person, a German foreign minister, that is calling out NATO for doing exactly what Todd quoted in that thing, which is putting our people right up on the border of Russia with war games and military exercises, trying to provoke Russia into doing something so that we can say we're in self-defense. And so that's one of a major lie. We always see that starting wars. The Gulf of Tonkin, for instance, our U-boats were trying to provoke the Vietnamese into attacking back our patrol boats because they were going up close to shore. And in fact, they had to make up one to have the lie that started the Vietnam War. So that's a very common one. The other one is what Tulsi Gabbard was saying in her speech. This is the big lie of right to protect or humanitarian war that is Hillary Clinton's favorite. Samantha Power, Hillary Clinton, they use this idea that we're protecting the people in that country. And because the progressives are soft-hearted, as Tulsi Gabbard said, we're soft-hearted. So when they tell you that the people in Libya are going to be shot by Gaddafi unless we bomb the country into oblivion, many of your liberals and your progressives say, yes, we have to help the people of Libya. And what she was saying is, no, this actually causes more suffering. It's the same, basically it's the same lie as in Vietnam. We have to bomb the village to save it. So if you think that your bombing is helping the people, even though it's killing them, it's hard to believe these humanitarian war lies. But you know what? So far, from what I see with the progressives, most of it has worked. Many progressives believe, just as these 51 foreign service officers are trying to say, we would be helping the people of Syria by bombing their country. And she's exactly right. So that's the second one. There's a third one, and I lost my train of thought, and I can't remember the third one. But those are two of the main ones, and I'll probably remember the third one as we speak here.
Okay, I just wanted to take this opportunity, because it's now at the bottom of the half an hour, just about, to encourage people to go to the Awake Radio YouTube channel where these podcasts get listed, and there is a link on Organic News Podcasts to support this radio show that I could really, really need. I mean, again, like we talk so much about the mainstream media being disinformation and, selling people the propaganda. And the reason, right, is because people like me, we need funding to bring the truth out to people. So again, it's Awake Radio and the number 1 on YouTube, or my own personal YouTube channel, which is April Waters with 2 T's, April being my middle name. And there are links to, to support what I do, because I've always had a passion for truth and justice for quite a long time. Okay, so what I just wanted to mention about what the Hawaiian Congresswoman, she talked about, the U.S.'s focus is to remove evil dictators, but doesn't this country, this country takes down good leaders that are there for the people and wanting to give rights to the people and putting evil dictators into power.
Absolutely. You look at Venezuela, and with Chavez, he was considered an enemy, and actually by many people's accounts, he wasn't the worst. Some of these people are also mixed. It's like any leader; they're not going to be perfect saints. And they're not going to be necessarily totally evil. They're going to be somewhere in the middle. Putin is a good example of that. People in Russia actually approve of Putin by a high degree. They don't consider him a dictator. Now here in the United States, we consider him the most evil thing in the world. And so other leaders, foreign leaders, I think the best is to let the foreign people decide who should be their leader. Not to have the United States as policemen of the world claiming to know who is bad. And most of the times, historically, the United States toppled the democratically elected leader of Mossadegh of Iran back in the 1950s and put a dictator, the Shah, in power. They did the same thing. They helped topple topple the democratically elected leader of Chile and put Pinochet in power. So there's a history of the United States not necessarily, this is not about looking at tyranny and bringing democracy. Those are all 100% lies. But they fool those lies about bringing democracy to these other places and helping people. They're very, very effective in fooling people because people will want to believe, it's what you said before, they want to believe that their government is well-intentioned and they want to believe that nobody would just kill, Madeleine Albright's a good example. Who wants to believe that this grandmother would just kill 500,000 children? No, it must be that she was trying to have a noble cause, a noble purpose. Certainly it's sad those children had to die, but she was a good person. She was trying to help the people of Iraq. Now that's something that minds want to believe. And so it's very powerful, this humanitarian war stuff, as silly as it is, bomb the village to save it, it's very powerful with Americans.
I just, again, wanted to interject really quickly and say that what the people don't realize is that they're wanting to believe or not wanting to believe, that their government, can or cannot do these things is a natural resource that the corporations / government use. It's just a natural resource that they prey upon.
Right.
Really, that's the way that I've just come to look at it because, look what we've done to the environment. So, we're doing the same thing to human beings and human health. And, I pretty much feel like we're at a point now where, nature's resources, we've completely exhausted them. And so, which is the reason why they have to manufacture, things. And so what better way to manufacture it than to just start digging in now to the naivety of your own people and, exploit that as a natural resource.
Well, that's the next stage, or already begun. Let me point out, George Kennan, the State Department, wrote back in 1948 in a memo that was secret for years, but he said that, there's only so long we're going to be able to keep hidden from the world that we only have, I forget the numbers exactly, 15% of the population.
6%.
Okay, we're using 60% of the world's resources, or whatever the numbers are. In other words, we're using a vastly disproportionate amount of resources at the expense of the rest of the world. And his point was, we better prepare for this, meaning we better prepare to defend ourselves, to keep getting them and prepare ourselves from the world's anger. That hasn't changed a bit, of course. And that's what, again, people don't want to admit about what our foreign policy really is about, but it's clear that it is. Now, I don't speak for anybody else. Views I say don't represent anyone other than myself. But when I mention the Warsaw Ghetto, I'm not saying there's a moral equivalence between the Nazis and Israel or the United States. But I am saying that in form, many of the practices we've adopted are following that same line. And including, when the Nazis occupied Europe, they met resistance, the French resistance, terrorists is what they called them, just like we do. And so there's a book came out, actually very good, even though it's published by the Association of the U.S. Army, Hitler's Bandit Hunters, talking about the SS and the Nazi occupation of Europe. Well, we're doing the same thing, if you're willing to think of it in a detached, objective way, with our Joint Special Operations Command, roaming the world, taking out any one that we deem to be some way part of the opposition to the United States. We have in our national security strategy document statements saying things like anti-access threats are amongst our biggest threats to this country. Meaning, what does anti-access threat mean? Common sense would tell you what we're really saying is that a nation such as Ecuador or Venezuela that won't let us get in and take as much of the resources as we want at the price, only the price we're willing to pay, is an anti-access threat. So by that, standard, Russia's an anti-access threat as well. And just the other day, today maybe.
That's debt-based thinking. It's like doing everything, backwards.
Well, it's pure imperialism, totalitarian imperialism. And it's not benefiting the U.S. people. We're also being exploited. I'm not a Marxist. Let me be clear on that. But you don't have to be a Marxist to realize that we're getting taken. We're using our resources to fight these wars, to take resources from other people, our resources being our young and older people who are being sent off to wage these wars. And at the same time, we're shipping the jobs overseas to places like China because the manufacturers can make more of a profit there. And Wall Street has their hands in every financial transaction that takes place around the world. So it's far more than a mere military-industrial complex. Like Eisenhower said, it's military-industrial congressional. But add in, international banking, or however you want to characterize the financiers who have their fingers in every transaction, just like the mafia does in certain places, maybe, or used to in Brooklyn, where they get the big from every transaction that takes place in the neighborhood. Well, that's what we're doing. And we have our military being the enforcers of that principle. And then they come back and they don't have jobs back here because the jobs have been shut down here in the factory and shipped overseas or whatever.
And they have too much post-traumatic stress to even get a job anyway.
And, well, exactly, that too. And then, so here's the other thing. This you started getting into before the break, but it's just weird. The American people, conservatives, libertarians, they despise centralized planning, economic planning, call it socialism, etc., but they just absolutely love global planning by our military to dominate the entire globe with a centralized command of only a few people making all these decisions, and they don't realize that it's also affecting the Defense Department budget affects everybody. We're already paying the price. It's not just the blowback, our own people being killed because of going out and inciting so much anger toward us, but we're paying the price also in just the lack of economic resources that we're allowed to retain. When they devise a budget every year, every 2 years, it's DOD and the CIA and NSA is part of DOD that gets the first bite of the apple. We get whatever crumbs are left, for roads, schools, etc. So we're already losing out. And every year, hidden budgets, etc., gross increases are always being given over to the military, industrial complex. And if you go out to Washington, D.C., you'll see where all this money is going into with the huge houses being built. I mean, it's 5 of the 10 richest counties in the country are right around Washington, D.C. It's not because of the Health and Human Services Department. It's because of the Department of Defense, the CIA, and all these other agencies around there involved with our wars.
Oh, Coleen, did you figure out what the third, or I thought you said three points before.
Yeah, these are the 3 kind of main categories, but I think that the top 2 are the ones I mentioned.
Okay.
I just kind of want to, I'm kind of thinking while Todd's talking here, if you ever watched Carl Sagan, these science videos that, especially with environmental science, where even a virus or a bacteria, the rabbits, all of the various living things and even the inert environment all have these interactions, constant interactions with each other. We have our own bodies are full of certain helpful bacteria that help us live and etc. So if you ever get into science and you realize how complex the living world is, well, the forces of nature, when you have these events going on, what happens is that a Hillary she does this very simple ends justify the means utilitarian ideology that people believe, they're my leader, and they know that it'll be a great outcome if we do such and such. And yet it's very complicated, all of the forces then that have, for lack of a better term, blowback, but they have these various impacts. So, for instance, let's go to climate change. Climate change, I mean, we were talking about the mass shooting in Orlando, but even climate change is even involved in this because the climate change that is happening, especially in the Mideast, is destabilizing the countries already, even if we did not have U.S. involvement. But then the U.S. opportunistically looks at a country that they maybe can take down because they already have this problem. They already have people that are out of work or unemployed, and they say, look, we can mobilize this group. George Soros has all of his democracy promotion things, and he'll get his people in there inciting groups of people. Well, that's easy to do in countries now that are experiencing catastrophes and climate change. So there's this very interplay. There's an interplay of forces. And, I don't care if you're Einstein right now, it's impossible to know and predict any kind of outcome of your actions, because the truth is we're almost looking at a way of getting to chaos, reversing civilization as we've known it exists. If you start to reverse civilization, you're going to get into these chaotic situations. I think in the United States, we're actually witnessing this with our mass shootings that are occurring every few days. And it's just that people are not able to connect the dots. It's very difficult for people to see these connections. So I just wanted to mention, I think that's what we're living in. It's really hard, even if you were that smart, in order to understand some of this. But all of these things are influencing other things, and we're just kind of like sitting here, ridiculously stupid and not understanding that we ourselves are the victims of a lot of this stuff.
Okay, let me see. I wanted to. I have an article here. It's actually by Ron Paul, and it's entitled, "Why Does It Look Like the U.S. is Rescuing ISIS?" Because I have interviewed a lot of people that do talk about how the United States is basically funding ISIS. And just the first couple of paragraphs say, the ongoing war in Syria may see some escalation soon. A report that 51 State Department employees out of 13,000 Forest Service officers signed a memo urging President Obama to change his focus in Syria from fighting ISIS to fighting the secular Assad government has caused quite a stir. The fact that such a small number of individuals make this a noteworthy story shows that propaganda continues to reign supreme. It makes no sense that U.S. can weaken ISIS by attacking the main opponent of ISIS, Assad. We're constantly smothered in rhetoric about how America must stop ISIS, yet ISIS has been on the ropes and in trouble. The group has been on the run, and what does the U.S. want to do? They want to hurry up and bomb Assad, which they've been trying to do for 5 years now. I mean, so yeah, like it's pretty clear that this whole wanting to stop terrorism is just smoke and mirrors for, just ongoing war profiteering. And I mean, because the corporations don't care about the people. They don't care about depopulating the planet. I mean, they don't care about anything. I mean, look what's going on in Flint. I mean, it was the city itself, the governor, who poisoned the water supply, and then they go and cover it up and deny that there's any health problems. And the same thing is actually going on in the Gulf. I just interviewed on Friday, which I'm going to play next Tuesday, an interview with the director of the film called The Rising film, about the cover-up of the BP oil spill and the Corexit that they, put on the oil to try to cover up the amount of the oil that got leaked, which is made so many people sick down there. And it's just, so, and where's the government accountability? I mean, who goes to jail with all of these failed policies? And I mean, you can't even put a governor in Flint in jail. Anybody?
Well, I think.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Todd.
Well, again, I think the profiteering is obviously a big part of it, the central part of it, but something more diabolical is taking place politically, and again, I'm relying a lot on Clausewitz because I think he was put aside the misrepresentation of him as this warmonger, but is a philosopher of war. Certainly understood how to wage it, but he understood it, the psychology of it. And as I say, he talks about the need for hatred and enmity to fight the wars. Now I sort of lost my train of thought here briefly, but
what I think is diabolical is the quest for full spectrum dominance.
Exactly.
And the idea, the notion that you can become the empire and rule the world. Every country that's become powerful, the Romans, you can go through history and see that people become very arrogant and believe that they are the exceptional, indispensable nation in the world or the group of people, and that their civilization is so superior to the barbarians that they need to control what's around them all throughout history. The United States now has just followed suit, only instead of just controlling part of the world because we're so far along, it's essentially to control the world. So, yes, to make a lot of money about it, too. But also, this control is the thing. And now, of course, the last remaining areas of the world that the United States does not have full control over are Russia and China. And so that's the next thing. Hillary has said, pivot to China, control Russia. Unbelievably dangerous because we're looking at use of nuclear weapons in this, crazy pursuit of full spectrum dominance.
That's exactly right, and that's what I was leading up to. We'll fight World War III to the last German life, is what we're saying. We'll fight these various wars, even if a whole lot of people in places like Orlando and other American cities get killed, so long as Washington, D.C., which is a hardened defense city, keeps the people running things protected. So this is beyond just making money for, industry or whatever. It's all about, like Coleen said, full spectrum dominance. Right. And you don't have to speculate on that. It's not a hypothetical. Right. Just have to read the documents that are there available for everyone to read and to see.
Jeremy,
it's killing human Americans as well as foreign people who are not part of it, but we're paying the price.
Jeremy Corbyn said it really wonderfully in an interview on Democracy Now! Because I'm always saying this thing too. Because people love to point fingers and blame the victims, the refugees or whatever. And, start pointing some fingers at the people at the top. How long of a war do you have to have? Come on. It's like, it's so obvious, like failed policies and ongoing wars. If you haven't accomplished anything yet, where's the progress? And yet, the people don't hold anybody accountable. Like they'll just let these wars, go on endlessly, and no one is ever held accountable, even though ISIS is getting stronger and larger, just like Al Qaeda did. And I was sort of hoping we have about 10 minutes that we could talk about. The CIA releases the new and gruesome details on the torture program and all that. Nonsense about, using the scientific methods, to get information out of bad people is another lie.
Exactly. It's exactly the same as because it's the lie of Zero Dark 30, the movie that Leon Panetta, director of the CIA, leaked false information to Catherine Bigelow. All false. That whole movie is based on false information. But moviegoers believed it was true that the people that tortured were trying to get information in order to save lives. The same plot as Jack Bauer. So noble intentions, as Tulsi Gabbard said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But those good intentions are also a lie. There are good people in government that are well-intentioned, but many of them, if they do understand the real truth, they have families and they have to keep quiet. They can't become whistleblowers.
Todd, did you want to say anything about it was Dror Ledeen, the staff attorney at the ACLU National Security Project, It's on the ACLU page, his article. So I'll just read. The CIA released 50 new documents yesterday relating to its post-9/11 torture and rendition program. Despite the many disclosures that have come in the course of our decade-long fight to reveal the details of the program, the new revelations still have the capacity to shock. The documents released in response to the ACLU Freedom of Information Act lawsuit vividly depict the brutality of torture and further expose the fiction that this abuse is a scientific method for extracting information from victims. The documents also reveal how hard the CIA worked to bury the evidence of its crimes, including by seeking to silence the victims. Let me see. It's the death of the detainee Gul Rahman, who was basically tortured by freezing to death, and his family is suing the CIA? Let me see. Concluded that he was singled out for especially harsh torture because of pressure to break him. We learned that he was kept nude or in a diaper, forced to, go to the bathroom on himself for most of his detention, solely for humiliation. When they ran out of diapers, the guards would use a handcrafted diaper secured by duct tape. CIA torturers kept Rahman naked in cold conditions with minimal food or sleep and kept questioning him even when he appeared incoherent. When they decided he wasn't sufficiently broken, CIA personnel brutalized, starved, and froze him to death and then lied about it. It's just disgusting.
Okay. Yeah, no, we know how disgusting it is. And let me say, a lot of the people were just subjected to sleep deprivation, which too many people think, well, okay, I've gone without sleep for a bit, and what's the big deal? Solzhenitsyn said that, he was tortured that way by the Soviets. And he said that was the worst of all the tortures that they used, because your body would just shut down. It would fall in upon itself. Every organ would begin shutting down. It was the absolute worst form of torture there was. And that was routinely used on all the detainees. But just a couple points. So I helped on a case trying to get accountability for a former Guantanamo prisoner. And in that case, and in every other single case where lawsuits have been brought against the CIA officers, military officials, like Jeffrey, it's so long since I've talked of some of this stuff, I'm losing my memory of it. But General Jeffrey Miller, who is really in charge of incorporating torture into the Guantanamo program. But all these cases are dismissed routinely because they say that these guys were doing this within the scope of their employment. Just think about that. American officials are released from liability by our courts, because they were torturing within the scope of their employment. That's their defense, and that's what the charges are dismissed, or cases are dismissed upon. That is a saying, or worse, I would say, for the Germans saying, I was just following orders. Right. Isn't it? Think about it. So many different ways that we have adopted practices of the worst totalitarian regimes in history, and now it's routine to us. One thing I want to get to, and this applies to both Israel and America, United States today, we talk about democracy and exporting democracy, etc. And if we look at what we export as democracy, we're exporting totalitarian democratic regimes. Regimes that are either subject to our military control, or the leaders who we get in power one way or another are taking our orders. But J.L. Kalman, a historian, a political scientist in Israel in 1952, he was writing about the East European communist regimes taking shape at the time and calling themselves democracies. And he came up with the term totalitarian democracies to describe them. And as he said, I'll try to make this quick because I know we're running out of time. The totalitarian democratic school, on the other hand, is based upon the assumption of a sole and exclusive truth in politics. It may be called political messianism in the sense that it postulates a preordained, harmonious, and perfect scheme of things to which men are irresistibly driven and at which they are bound to arrive. They are an integral part of an all-embracing, coherent philosophy. Politics is defined as applying the art of this philosophy to the organization of society, and the final purpose of politics is only achieved when this philosophy reigns supreme over all fields of life. Well, that's fascism, except here it allows for elections to take place periodically, but it doesn't exclude the role that propaganda like Edward Bernays wrote and taught about, and the Germans put into practice. So that's what we're really seeing here in the United States today, in Israel today, totalitarian democracy, which is really, Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. So I think a proper term might really be applied to the Republican Party, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump. They're democratic fascists. They're operating within a system that they have to be elected by, but in practice, in what they demand of the people is fascism itself. And that's where we're at today. And unless we realize that, everything else is going to be just trying to figure out, how we go wrong here, how we go wrong there, when in fact the system has evolved and changed in front of our very eyes.
Oh, Coleen, we have 3 minutes.
No, I agree. That was a great sum up there. It does come back. The people are the answer. Tulsi Gabbard said this. Others. We somehow have to get more people to understand that they themselves are going to pay the cost. Yep. Our requirement to register for the draft, which has always been for 18-year-old males, is being extended to females. I thought maybe some people would say, "Oh, I'm not into that." If you aren't into it, you're going to be fined, and I think have some serious repercussions if you refuse to register for the draft. Maybe that is a way for people to see that the cost of these things are not simply being borne by foreign people. They are now coming back. If you happen to be in one of these public places where there's a shooting, there are costs, especially the monetary costs, the $19 trillion of debt that now keep us from spending taxpayers' money on our own needs. I agree with Donald Trump, America first. To be honest, the America first would mean less intervention abroad and more focus on ourselves. And let's try to reduce these costs that we are now paying as a result of continuing wars of aggression around the globe.
And I just want to say that I hope the people realize that they're simply in a gigantic abusive relationship with the people running this country. Like you're in a one-way relationship because the people are basically bestowing without taking the due process, to make sure that the people in charge are, really do have their interest in mind, because, the credit that the people just bestow on people in power who they don't even know and never even met are not going to turn around and give you the same credit. They'll throw you in jail or take away your rights in a heartbeat. So, remember that. And, I guess with that, Coleen, where's your blog and where can people find, it's Consortium News that you write for, and you also have a blog.
Yeah, I write at the Huffington Post. I haven't recently. I've really been doing more talking, but I would suggest Consortium News as one of the best.
And Todd?
I write for Consortium News. I've not been writing much lately either, working on another project. I do have a Facebook page that's being put together, the Institute for the Study of American Militarism, and that's something that we'd like to get going more with Coleen's help and a few other people, because that's what we're up against. And there's the Institute for the Study of War by the neocons, where they promote war. We want to argue the reverse, that militarism is killing us. American militarism is killing us, killing American people to begin with, and then stretching out from there to kill foreign people. And we need to take our country back.
Amen. Thank you so much, Coleen Rowley and Todd E. Pierce. Have a great night.
Thanks a lot. I hope people will support that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So again, please go to Awake Radio and the number 1 on YouTube. Please support this show or my YouTube channel. April Waters with 2 T's. And also, I forgot to mention this projectsalam.org Inventing Terrorist Study. So it's www.projectsalam.org Inventing Terrorist Study. It's a PDF. Thank you. Speak truth to power. Good night.